Alyssa and my daughters bought their first business, and here's how you can too. They came to me to buy a brick and mortar business. The business cost $150,000. Clearly, my 12 and 14-year-old didn't have $150,000. So I structured loan documents that both my daughters signed that they owed their dad $150,000. And as a nice dad, I didn't charge them interest. Their 2 locations after year 1 made over $250,000. So luckily for them, they were able to pay dad back $150,000 of that $225,000, leaving $75,000 to go into their operating account. So if you're not my 12 and 14-year-old daughter and you have a cash flow business, you can come to someone like myself or anyone else similar to me, and you can proposition to borrow $150,000 against that company's cash flow, because there is a demonstrated cash flow coming in. And I'm only speaking for myself, but I do those types of deals all the time.
Okay, the math doesn't work there. If the business costs $150,000, generally businesses sell for a multiple of their cash flow. But let's say in this case, it only was a one-time multiple and really the business made $150,000. They were willing to sell it for $150,000. And the business in the first year made $225,000. I guess if he's saying made, maybe he means profit. So they were able to pay him back. But generally, in order to grow a business, you have to invest. So some of the money they would have potentially paid him back was presumably invested in growing the business. So this doesn't make a ton of sense. It also only works because a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old have all their living costs covered, right? If you go buy that business and you have to run it full time, you've got to pay yourself something. You've got household bills, money you need to live on, so you wouldn't be able to pay the loan back in a year anyway and live on nothing for a year. And just the whole idea that a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old are running a full-time business and making $250,000, don't they go to school? Like I don't know. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Typically, when you buy a business, a lot of the deals that we see that we've helped with, people are using an SBA loan to buy the business to fund the acquisition cost. And those are 10-year loans. So you have 10 years to pay back the money used to buy a business. And by having the loan stretched over 10 years, that's the only thing that keeps those payments low enough that you can afford to pay the loan and pay yourself and hopefully have a little left over to grow the business and return your own investment in the business. So to expect to buy a business and pay the loan back in a year, it's highly, highly unlikely and highly unusual that that business would be selling for a low enough price but make enough money that you could pay it all back in a year unless you grew it like 5x the first year you had it. So it's a nice story, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I wouldn't go around thinking you're going to find somebody willing to cut you a check for $150,000 unless he's your dad and is also going to pay for all your living costs for that year. So it seems unlikely.
If you had one piece of advice for young entrepreneurs, what would that be?
So many people are scared to fail. It's stupid. Like, go for it. Like, you just got to go. I'll throw one more on there. You got to get great people around you. Like, one of my best skill sets is attracting like the right people to like learn from, grow from, work together. So to me, it's like, my entire strategy is like, I'm going to outwork everybody. I'm going to have some pretty good common sense. And I'm just going to go for it with great people around me. And I think if you do those few things, I think your odds are pretty good.
Okay, I would say that's reasonably good advice. Definitely sitting on the sidelines is not going to get anything started. So you have to decide to go for it at some point. You want to hopefully have put enough thought into it that when you go for it, you know how much is at risk and whatever's at risk you can afford to lose, right? Go for it doesn't mean put 30 grand on credit cards and hope that it's going to work, because if it doesn't, that's a pretty big fail. It's one thing to say, don't be scared to fail. It's another thing to say, I now have $30,000 of credit card debt and this isn't working. So yes, take action, but take smart action, understand the risks and understand how much you are going to lose potentially if it doesn't work. And as long as that is an amount you're okay with, then yes, go for it. Definitely good to have good people around you. And the one thing he said was his plan was to outwork everybody. Definitely consider hard work is part of the equation. You don't get to be successful without putting in hard work. There's no easy money. There's no get rich quick. There's no shortcuts. So plan to work hard, take the chance, know it's at risk, limit your risk by being smart about what you start in the first place, and then go for it. And you probably won't get it right the first time or the second time or the fourth time. But one of those times, if you keep trying, it's going to work out and it's going to all pay off in the end.
If you're starting a business and you take out a loan, you're a moron, because there's so many uncertainties involved with starting a business, yet the one certainty that you'll have to have is paying back your loan. 99% of small businesses you can start with next to no capital. It's more about effort. Small businesses don't fail for lack of capital. They fail for lack of brains. They fail for lack of effort. If you start a business, you better know your industry and your company better than anyone in the whole wide world, because you're competing. If you're going to compete with me on one of my businesses, you better realize that I'm working 24 hours a day to kick your ass.
Okay. Well, Mark Cuban, I'd say he does know what he's talking about, and I would listen to that advice for the most part. You don't want to borrow money to start a business unless you are 100% sure that whatever you're borrowing the money for, you are going to be able to pay back, and including the interest, and still have it make sense. So you don't want to borrow money to start something if you don't need to borrow it, if that isn't part of the plan, and if that isn't an essential aspect of the business that you already know well. So, I mean, I can, for example, imagine if you're starting a car dealership, you've been in the car dealership business for 30 years and you're getting into a new one, you know what you're doing. And you may borrow money to be able to initially stock the inventory of cars that you need to sell as a car dealer. I would say you're not taking a huge risk because you have 30 years of experience in that business and you know you're going to be able to sell the cars. But I don't think that's what he was talking about. I think he was talking about borrowing $10 or $50 or $100,000 to start some business that you don't know anything about, but you can't afford to start it or figure out how to start it with less money or no money. And that is risky. And that is definitely something I agree with him. That is not the way to get started.
Your company a Latin name. I want you to find out what SIC codes banks like, what SIC codes banks don't like, so you don't start out with the wrong name. Now, since we know they speak Latin, now we want to go in and let's say you want to be big. You have to put in your company what you want it to be. One of my companies is Robust Inc. I went into Google and I said, I want to be big. I went in, I said, what's big in Latin? And it said, big. Robustus. And it cannot and will not teach you this because this is economic masonry. People didn't even know that exists.
People didn't know it exists because it's not a real thing. You just made it up. Economic masonry. Okay. Naming your business something in Latin is the weirdest, most random advice that I've heard in a long time. And I have no idea where this guy got the idea from, but I guarantee you Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, none of those guys were thinking, man, if I want to have a big company, I better name my business something in Latin. Biggest Maximus Inc. So that way I can be sure of having $1 billion company. And if I name it something like Tiniest, I'm never going to be a big company. This is the craziest advice I've ever heard. Name your company something that makes sense for what you're doing, or name it something that doesn't mean anything, like Google or Xerox or CapForge. That way you can do anything or pivot as you need to, and you don't have to keep changing the name, right? If you name your company Great Haircuts for Dogs, and now you want to do cat grooming and llama grooming, well, now your name doesn't make much sense. So then you back it up to Great Grooming for Pets. But then what if, something else comes along and you decide you really want to do graphic design? Well, now you have to change the name again because it no longer makes sense. But if you just named your company something like Amazing Company Group Inc., then you really could do anything. Or you name it something like Googly Gook, and then you can do anything too. Okay, maybe that one's a little extreme on the silly side, but you get the idea. I would not worry about Latin, and I guarantee you the bank is not looking at the name of your company to decide how to lend you money. They're looking at your balance sheet. They're looking at how much cash you have. They're looking at your profitability. If that looks good, your business could be named abouttofail.com, but they'd still be willing to give you a loan because in fact, you're cash flow positive and doing great. On the other hand, if your bank or your business is named Robust, but you're losing money, no bank's going to lend to you. It doesn't matter what your name is. So this is just ridiculous advice, and I wouldn't spend any more time thinking about it.
Every time I start a business, I bring the funding. And then there's other things I don't bring, right? So I need my operational partner to bring those things. I don't do anything alone. I have operational partners in everything that I do. I've never just decided to start my own venture by myself. I'm a big believer in operational partners because it's just going to help you be able to actually grow and create something to fruition.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, really, the person who can run the business, I would say, is the most important part of the business. Somebody who brings money and no other real value it may seem like a big deal when you're the person trying to start something and you don't have the money. Somebody who comes in and says, oh yeah, I can write a check for $100,000 or $300,000 to help this business get started. That seems like a lot. Like, you're like, how would I ever save $100,000? But the reality is, once you get the business up and running and start making money, then what they added at the beginning is not any longer, they're not bringing any more value, right? Now you're doing all the work, you're there every day, you're running things, you're growing things, and now the money is a lot less critical, but they're still taking their 50% of the profits or whatever the agreement was. And a lot of times that starts to build resentment. So it's one of the reasons I think the best partnerships are formed when both partners are contributing equally for the long term, and the business needs both partners to succeed. When one person just writes a check and then walks away and the other person does all the work, it rarely turns into a successful long-term partnership because it's unequal. It's the same as romantic partnerships or friendships. When one person is more invested than the other person, it rarely works out well. And in this case, the person doing the work is the one more invested. You might think the one that put the money in is more invested, but that money didn't mean much to them. They could have lived without it. It wasn't a big deal, and that's all they contributed. And time and effort and skill is much more valuable in my mind. So if you're the person with the skills and you're gonna run the business, try to look for money that you can pay back and then be clear of. Because if you're taking on a partner who's gonna be a part owner but not involved and all they did was give you the money, sooner or later, that's gonna be a partnership that falls apart, I think.